Now this is how you do a figure! You know, Ankylosaurus is a dinosaur that I don't really see too often in pop culture. That or I'm not looking hard enough. I mean, it's a living tank, why would you let this thing go unnoticed? And this figure is probably my favorite representation of that dinosaur. What makes it so great? Well, let's take a look at it. The painting and sculpting of this figure is freaking delicious. If this thing was a steak, it'd be a perfect medium rare. While it only uses mainly 3 colors, it doesn't look or feel bland. Although there's one thing that does feel bland, it's the underside of the figure. Yet despite this, it doesn't keep it from looking boring. In fact, I can't stop looking at it, and I mean that in a good way. I think the dark blackish brown on its back and the red around its eyes helps it pop out. Speaking of the eyes, they're a solid black, which might seem a bit lazy, however they're actually accurate to this version of Ankylosaurus. Now while this coloration might look minimal, it's actually a lot more colorful than the Jurassic World Ankylosaurus, which is just gray and brown. Although I wish there was some paint in between the scales to give it a bit more detail. As for the armor, it isn't sharp, which makes sense. If this thing was pointy, it would be a lot bloodier. It doesn't help with the fact that the spikes look like stones, which makes it even cooler. However, for some reason the spikes on the back of the tail aren't painted, which does ruin it a bit for me. I never understood why most of the paint tends to end towards the tail on some figures. That, and I don't know why the spikes on the side of the tail here are different colors for the rest of the body. Moving towards the tail club, it looks a bit flat, which is odd considering whenever I think of this thing, I always imagine it being a lot thicker. But overall, the figure looks great. It's really chef's kiss worthy. Now the articulation of this figure is something that I had a lot of fun with. The head is on a ball joint, and so is the neck. But there's a feature that Hammond collection figures should all have: a hinge at the jaws. I'm very thankful for this. If only Mattel took note of this much sooner.
Now one problem the head does have is the fact that if you rotate a certain way, the neck tends to spin out of place, which can get really annoying. Now this problem does reoccur on another part of the body, which I'll get into later.
The legs can move back and forth, the knees and feet can bend, and they can all swivel. This goes for the back legs too. Now admittedly, I would have liked to see the legs spread out, and added waist segment on the body, but even without those, you don't hinder the figure's articulation in any way. The figure doesn't feel like a brick. In fact, the poses I can get with this thing are very expressive, and I think it might be due to something a lot of us really want to see more of in the Hammond collection line: tail articulation. This thing is an absolute pleasure to pose. Sure, the tail isn't 100% perfect admittedly, but I think we can all agree we'll take this over bendy wire any day. Although I'll never understand why Mattel gives special treatment to certain dinosaurs. I still don't get why Concavenator has wrist articulation and the later theropods released afterwards don't.
And remember what I said about the head? Well, the same thing applies here to the tail. I don't know why it does this, but it's very bothersome. Yeah, that's why I said this isn't exactly perfect, but at least it's still better than bendy wire.
So overall, while lacking in a few places, the articulation is an absolute joy. For accessories, it doesn't need any, so let's just skip to scaling it out. He's about a foot long.
Yeah, he's like an inch off, but it's pretty close.
Here he is next to the Figmasaki Izuyoi, the NECA SOS Goji, the Emmer Collection Velociraptor, the Hammond Collection Velociraptor, the Jurassic World Ankylosaurus, which is extremely inferior compared to it, and the Dino Escape Adult Bumpy figure. So, do I recommend this guy?
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay, let me tell you something. This thing is on par with, if not even slightly better, than the Hammond Collection Ceratosaurus, which this figure goes really well with. I can't stress how much I'd recommend this, not just to Jurassic Park collectors, but for anyone who wants an Ankylosaurus figure. It's a very solid release that I'm very glad I got. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one, whenever that'll be. You know, if the Hammond Collection Adult Stegosaurus is going to be this big, then they better give it waist articulation, since we already have a mainline figure that does. We'll just have to wait and see.